First of all, I would like to thank Brooke for organizing a fantastic conference. I cannot think of a better way of organizing such a challenging event, bringing together so many talents from so many places. Also, thank you for the European Center on Law and Justice for the terrific work that they have been doing for a long time. It's a privilege to be here. Distinguished guests, dear friends. We experienced a very difficult recession in the last couple of years. We all experienced that, but one field, and I'm not talking about restructuring, was very, very successful and blooming. And this is universal jurisdiction. As we heard from my British colleague and my American and Israeli colleagues, it's been the golden age for universal jurisdiction. It's been a golden age for the execution and prosecution of international crimes on the national level. If you attend academic conferences frequently, as I do, and if you speak to international lawyers, as I do, quite frequently, not only in the context of universal jurisdiction, you find yourself protecting legitimacy and effectiveness of international legal tools. It's true when it comes to banking regulation, financial regulation. It's also true when it comes to universal jurisdiction. The effectiveness and the legitimacy of universal jurisdiction as a legal tool depends on its use and abuse. And I think we all agree by now, regardless of your identity, whether you're an attorney or not, that if there is a systematic abuse of the system on so many levels, both in theory and in practice, our challenge is to tell the world the story of abusing one of the most important international legal tools in modern history. What I'll try to do in the next less than 10 minutes is taking the theories of Erwin Kotler, his wonderful and important remarks, with Dori Gold's approach of the devil is in details. Because I think at the end of the day, attending these meetings, talking about these legal concepts, the reality is always somewhere between the theory, the legal theories, and the details. So what exactly does universal jurisdiction mean? And here it's very important because obviously we talked about it from so many different perspectives. And let's be clear on that. It means that we're talking about national adjudication of international grave crimes. So clearly it started with crimes like piracy. And obviously the Jews were the first ones to remember the Nuremberg crimes that we all mentioned this morning. But starting from piracy and going through prosecuting the American general or Israeli foreign ministers and leaders, it's a long way. And obviously, when I feel uncomfortable about that, regardless of my knowledge about international law, I assume that many other reporters and activists feel the same way. What happened here? How did we get to a point where we went from piracy all the way to the people who were fighting against terrorism, and as we heard from Professor Kotler, fighting the Iranian regime on this sense? I think what happened here is the clear story of judicial globalization. After the Cold War and what happened in the 80s and 90s, globalization wasn't so successful only on the level of communication and internet and our ability to bring together so many wonderful talents in one room as we're doing now. Judicial globalization is also the risk of judicial intervention in selective way, in consistent way, and as we heard before from Anne, using bias, NGOs' motives. And here, this is an interesting comparison with what we're seeing now in various economic markets. The buzzwords on Wall Street, not too far from here, is let's find a way to keep the rules as they are, but let's bring some limits to the table. What are the rules that will limit the way we use the existing legal framework? What can work very well in so many other fields can work very well for universal jurisdiction. And here I want to point out that this is also a European problem. And the reason why I say a European problem, because at the end of the day, although we heard this morning that it's also in New Zealand and some other places, most cases are in the UK, as we heard before from the media, in Belgium, in Spain. And what's happening now is that Europeans thinkers in Europe, academics, they care about that, believe it or not, as much as we care about that. And what is the reason for that? The reason for that is that internally within the UK, Spain, and Belgium, there are discussions about the future of the criminal system and international law. It's a complex discussion about the division of power between the executive power and the judiciary. And the case that I can bring to the table, what happened in Spain, and I was extremely involved in this case, when various Spanish courts, what's called in Spain the National Court, brought investigation against various Israeli and American diplomats and heads of states. What happened was that actually triggered a very serious discussion within Spain about what should be the division of power between the judiciary and the executive branch. Who should make the decision on who should bring people to the court and to justice? By the way, what happened in Spain as a result of these cases, two very important things. One, Spain, for example, we heard about Salah Shada case. Spain decided, the court decided to withdraw the case. And at the same time, Spain changed, just a couple of months ago, the law about universal jurisdiction. You need a Spanish nexus between the person who allegedly committed the crime and the case. Here I would like to quote Kissinger, who said 10 years ago, he actually, it's amazing, it's been a wave, as I mentioned, of universal jurisdiction cases, but actually he looked at the future and he said, I understand 10 years ago what are the risks associated with universal jurisdiction. And that's what he said. He said, it would be ironic if a doctrine designed to transcend the political process turns into a means to pursue political enemies rather than universal justice. In the end, an excessive reliance on universal jurisdiction may undermine the political will to sustain the human norms of international behavior so necessary to temper the violent times in which we live. That's what he said 10 years ago. And now, after seeing all these cases, his words are really vivid in this room as I speak. Obviously, when you go to Europe, there are differences internally between the UK and Italy, for example, and Germany and France on the other hand. The ties between the executive branch and politics are different. And obviously, as you get closer and closer to the political system, issues of foreign policy are more relevant to our discussion. Unfortunately, we don't have much time, but I would like, towards the end of my remarks, 2-3 minutes, to talk about four action items, things that I learned through my journey in dealing with universal jurisdiction at the United Nations and in Europe, and things that we could all do together. The first one is the connection between universal jurisdiction and as a concept and what we heard this morning about lawfare in a broader context. These things are related. And if the Goldstone report hints and recommends the countries to initiate universal jurisdiction cases, some of them may do that. And in fact, just a couple of days ago, the Israeli mission at the UN, the Israeli embassy in the United States, received some comments about that. My second point is about the review process of universal jurisdiction cases. I think it's very important that if you're taking part in these kind of discussions, you share with your European colleagues the importance of executive review in many of these cases. And my two final remarks, which are extremely important in this context. The first one is the difference between being reactive and proactive. If I look at many academic circles, when it comes to international law, they tend to be very reactive. They look at the last decade and say, what happened? How the important concept of universal jurisdiction is slowly becoming the most important weapon against fighting terrorism and democracy. But what I'm suggesting here, that instead of looking back at the last 10 or 20 years, we should look forward and see what and how the next 10 years are going to look like. And we should go out there, and we should all continue the discussions outside of this room. And final point. I traveled quite extensively to Asia, and believe it or not, in Asia, things sound so bizarre and so far away. Because all these kind of discussions about lawfare, for many Asian experts and policymakers and Asian leaders, this whole discussion sounds just so far away. However, Asian people are not that far away. These are the people who are sitting around the same table when it comes to the Security Council. These are the same people who are sitting around the same table when it comes to an academic debate or the even Passover Seder. And the reason why I mentioned that is because these kind of discussions tend to neglect the importance of the future of Asia on universal jurisdiction. And I think that some of these academic scholars and activists who are becoming so important in the discussion of the future of international law will be extremely influential and important to listen to, learn from, and think with when it comes to implementing and discussing universal jurisdiction in Europe and in the United States. Thank you very much.